As far as day 2 goes compared to day 1, day 2 now we're going to shift and we're going to reflect. Yesterday or 2 days ago when we talked about 9-4 day 1, we did vertical stretch, right? That was with the amp or the period. Okay, we did some horizontal stretching because of how long your period was. Okay? These next two are going to look like this or in this type of format. You're either going to have y equals a times the sine of b x minus h plus k. Or a cosine b x minus h plus k. Okay? What does it mean when you add or subtract on the outside? This number, the k, is going to tell you whether it goes up or down, depending on if it's positive or negative. What's an adding or subtracting on the inside do? This number will tell us to shift it left or right, depending on if it's positive or negative. That's the same as what we've been dealing with all year. There's nothing different about that. Okay? The only difference is when we shift left or right, you guys are going to have to deal with adding pi pieces together. Okay? So we'll go through a couple of those so that you guys understand. But that's what it's going to be when you have those particular things. Another term that I'm going to use is called a midline. On Monday, when we did this section, when we did day 1, everything turned around the x-axis, right? That's where the snake curve was at. It was around that. That was the midline. Where if I draw a middle line through the whole thing, that's where it would cut it in half. We're going to draw midlines, and all that's based on whether you move it up or down. Okay? So, here's what you can expect of something like this. You have g of x equals 2 the sine of 4x plus 3. Again, they're going to want you to identify the amp. They're going to ask you to identify the period, and then what transformation took place. So, for instance, what number is in the amp position? 2. So the amp, remember, is the absolute value of whatever is in that position. So it's the absolute value of 2. How do you find your period? It's 2 pi over the absolute value of whatever is in the b. That's not a 6, that's a b. Okay, some of you asked that the other day. You were like, oh, is that a 6 or a b? So, no, it's not both. So in this particular case, what number is in the b position? 4. What's 2 over 4 reduced to? 1/2. So that's pi over 2. Now, the only number that you have not accounted for, you've accounted for the 2 and you've accounted for the 4. What's the only other piece that you haven't accounted for? The 3. Is the 3 added or subtracted inside or outside? Outside. Why is it outside? There's no parentheses. Exactly right. So that means that this should go where? Up 3. Good. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm now going to draw what this thing should look like. Now I'm going to put the x-axis down here. Why did I put the x-axis lower than on that instead of right in the middle? Because the whole thing goes up 3. Exactly. So what I'm going to do, what are you confused about?
I wasn't here. I was gone, so I was
Oh, okay. So as far as up 3 goes, 1, 2, 3, I'm now going to make a dashed line. This dashed line is representing the line that it's going to revolve around. Okay? This is known as the midline. Okay? Or the line that goes through the middle, if you want to think of it that way. That's the midline. Now, the amp. On Monday, when we talked about the amp, we talked about it going up to or down to, correct? off of that x-axis. But this time we're not off the x-axis, we're off of the new midline. So if I'm at 3 already, what's 2 more? 5. 1, 2. And what's 2 less than 3? 1. Am I going to hit the x-axis at all with my picture? No, I'm not. Now, as far as my period goes, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to make pi over 2. Okay, so that's my period. Now remember what we did the other day? We cut everything in half now. What is half of a half? A fourth. Now, if you're unsure about how to get that, all you do, yes, it's dividing it by 2, but at the same time, if it's already pi over 2, just times the bottom by 2. What's half of a fourth? 1/8. Now, something with this, for this particular part now, just so that you guys are aware of this. From 0 to there is 1/8. From 1/8 to 1/4 is also an eighth. Right? 2/8 is 1/4 if I reduce it. Correct? All I'm doing, just so that you guys understand this, is I'm adding an eighth every time because that was this number here. 1/8 plus 1/8 is 2/8 plus 1 more eighth is 3/8. So that's the number that should go right in there. Should be 3/8 or 3 pi over 8. That's how I get them, is I find the little one and then I just add it 3 times or multiply it by 3, either way. Now, sine curve. Did sine curve start at the origin or did it start at the amp? Origin. But for this particular case, remember we moved everything up 3. So it starts on the midline. Okay? So this point here, point 1, is going to start there. Then the next dot over at the 1/8. Are we going up or down? Did the sine curve go up to start or did it go down to start? Up. Good. That's point 2. Point 3 came back and hit the midline. Where did point 4 go? Down to my 3/8 pi. And where did the 5th dot go? Back to the midline. Now that's something that I don't remember if I said this on Monday or not, but did you see how I made them as ordered pairs or I made them as points? I referred to them as points. When I'm doing this, this helps me. Okay? When you're doing the sine curve, points 1, 3, and 5 should be on your midline. When you're doing the sine curve. When you're doing the cosine curves, points 2 and 4 should be on your midline. So that might be a helpful hint for you. I don't know. So now, what do I need to do to finish? Connect them. Yeah. And again, we're only graphing 1 period's worth. Okay? So what's the difference so far between what we did Monday and what we're doing here? I just moved it up so far, right? Okay. All right, what number is in the amp position? 5. Period. What number's in the B? Okay, now, here's where yesterday when I was observing one of my other classes do this, they were doing this wrong. 2 divided by a half is not 1. Which is what a lot of people think. They think it's a half of 2, but that's not what it said. It said 2 divided by a half. Does anybody know what that number is? 4. When you're dividing by a fraction, you multiply it by the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 1/2? 2. And 2 times 2 pi is 4 pi. Okay, so that's how I got that. As far as the shifting goes, do I shift this up or down any? No. I didn't put one in there that had up and down. What about right and left? How far? Which way? To the right. How far did you say? 3 pi. Okay? All right, now time to draw it. When I draw this, should I put my x-axis more in the middle or down or up? Should I put it right in the middle or should I put it higher or lower? Did I shift it up or down any?
No.
No, so just keep it in the middle. Okay? If I shifted it up or down, then that's where I would want to move that x-axis up or down. If it shifts up, I move the x-axis lower. If I shifted it down, I move it higher. So it's out of the way. Now, what's my amp? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. What's the midline for this one? Or the x-axis, right. It didn't go up or down any, so therefore my midline is that x-axis. Good job. Now, typically I started at 0, but now I'm moving everything to the right. How far?
3 pi.
Right. So I'm not starting at 0, I'm starting at 3 pi. 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi. How long is the period? 4 pi. Savannah, what's 3 pi plus 4 pi? Yay, 7 pi. So 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi. Didn't quite make my line long enough, but there's 7 pi. What's halfway between 3 and 7? 5. What's halfway between 3 and 7 is 5. What's halfway between 5 and 3? 4. And what's halfway between 5 and 6? Or 5 and 7? 6. Okay? So there's my numbers that I need. When you're a cosine curve, do you start at the amp or do you start at the midline? Amp. Sine curves start on the midline. Cosine curves start at the amp. Okay? So the first dot should be right here at 3 pi. That's dot number 1. Dot number 2, where should dot number 2 go? Down to 4 pi, and it's on the midline. Dot 3, where should it go? Down to the bottom. Where's point 4 go? Up to the 6. And where's point 7 go? Or 7? Up. Now, I overheard someone say when they got to the 5 pi that it should go back up. Now, be careful, because that's the big problem, is that you want to bounce in the midline. It goes through the midline every time, not bounce at the midline. Okay? So what shape should this make? Kind of like a U or a V of some sort coming in here, or something like that. Okay? Again, everything got shifted over 1 pi unit. or 3 pi units. Okay? What do you think? What if we did both? What if it had an up and down, or a left and right and an up and down? Could you handle both? I think you can. You guys have been doing enough of those where if you had both at the same time, you'd be great. Now, the only other thing that could happen, on Monday we talked about stretching and shrinking, because that was the A and the B. We just talked about shifting right, left, up, and down. What's the only other type of transformation we haven't talked about yet? Reflection. Right. When do we have reflection? Okay. Reflection happens. Negative sign where? In front of A. That would be one of them. And that's a reflection. Over the x-axis. And where would the y-axis one go? On the inside. Which, I'm looking at it, and I don't think you'll have any that go on the inside. No, you won't have any that go on the inside. Now, here's what that means for you. Do you remember on the sine curve that we started on the midline and we went up to start with? Don't shake your head, no.
I didn't shake my head, no.
I wasn't looking at you. If this was a reflection, you know how this one went up to start with? I'd still started here, but guess what a reflection would be doing? Go down to start with. Okay? So that's the only difference. Or on the cosine curve, you know how we started up at the top midline, or the top amp? Guess what the reflection would be? Starting at the bottom amp. And it would look like a mountain rather than a V or U. Okay? So, on something like that where you have reflection, g of x equals negative sine of x minus 5. First of all, I want you to identify all the pieces that happen. What's the amp? It's not negative 1. 1. Remember, the amp is the absolute value of A, so therefore it's always positive. So the amp is 1. What's your period? 2 pi over 1, because there's not a number in the B, so therefore it's just 2 pi. Now, transformation-wise, is there any transformations that happened? Down 5. Why was it down 5? Because we have a negative 5 on the out. There's no grouping symbol, right? Now the negative. We also have a reflection. X-axis. So when I draw this, where am I going to put the x-axis? Right in the middle? The whole graph itself is moving down, so where should I move the x-axis? Up, to get rid of it, to get it out of the way. Where's my midline going to be? Down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Midline. Maybe label that with an M just so that you remember what it is. What's the amp? 1, which means 1 above negative 5 and 1 below negative 5. Now, as far as labeling your axes, or labeling where the pieces should go for your period, Do you want to label it on the midline or do you want to label it on the x-axis?
Does it matter?
It does not matter because there doesn't really, unless you want to, if you don't want them in the way, put them on the x-axis. If you don't care, I don't either, you can put it on the midline, whichever is easiest for you. Okay? Me personally, I like to put them on the x-axis regardless of where the x-axis is. So if I put the period out here at 2 pi, what's half of 2? 1 pi. What's half of pi? Pi over 2. Now, just to think about how I did this the first time. Since this is the short one, pi over 2 or a half plus a half is a full. Plus another half is what? 3 halves. Or 1 1/2. Or 1.5. Either way. For the sine curve, does the sine curve start on the midline or does it start on the amp? It starts on the midline. Remember, for sine curves, points 1, 3, and 5 are on the midline. So that means point 1, point 3, and point 5 are on the midline. Now, as far as points 2 and point 4 goes, this all depends on whether it was positive or negative. Did you say we had reflection, yes or no?
Yeah.
So instead of going up to start, we're going to go down. And then at point 4, we're going to be up. So I should have something that comes in here like that. Do you like how I labeled or I talked about them as order like points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Did that help? Okay, me personally, I think it does. Where remember for a sine curve, points 1, 3, and 5 are on the midline, and then point 2 and 4 would be on the amp. When it's cosine, 1, 3, and 5 are on the amp, and points 2 and 4 are on the midline. So that's the difference. Are you guys comfortable with this? Do you want me to do any more? Okay. So, on page 492, we're 26 to 30 evens. And 38 to 44 evens. Now, just so that you guys know the directions, on 26, 28, and 30, it says graph the function. Just like we've been doing. On 38 to 44, on 38 and 40, it says describe the transformation of the graph of f represented by the function g. Does it say graph them? No. Not for 38 and 40. It just says describe what's happening. You describing what's happening is you telling me the amp, the period, and whether it's shifting up or down, left to right, or reflecting. That's you telling me what's going on. And then 42 and 44, you are graphing those. So you should only have 5 graphs on your page for this one. Okay? Is everybody okay with that?